welcome to Telltale. This video, I'm going to do number 2 in my series of author overviews. This again is a very early science fiction author, earlier than R.F. Starzl even, and one that didn't write very many stories or books and is almost totally forgotten today. And that is G. Peyton Wertenbaker. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm bad at that sort of thing. I only see him in print. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. It looks like Wertenbaker. Okay. His full name is Green Peyton Wertenbaker. He just did everything as just G. Peyton Wertenbaker or Peyton Wertenbaker. He was born in Newcastle, Delaware. So he's an American author. Born in 1907, actually December 23rd, 1907. He died in July 26th, 1968. Yes, I'm referring to my notes because I have no memory. He is best known in the larger world as an editor in I believe the 40s and 50s and maybe late 30s of Fortune magazine and Time magazine. So this guy hit the big time. He also did write a little bit outside the science fiction genre, some fiction in the 1930s, and in the 1950s, 1960s, he wrote some nonfiction. But he got his start as a writer early, probably, it would have been pretty early in his life. Yeah, he wouldn't even have been 20 years old when he published his first story in Hugo Gernsback's Science and Invention magazine. This was before Amazing Stories. 1923. The August 1923 issue of Science and Invention, and he got the cover. There's a really cool cover illustration of the Man from the Atom. And there was a sequel written to The Man from the Atom that was published in Amazing Stories in 1926. And the other science fiction he wrote in 1926 in Amazing Stories, he published The Coming of the Ice. 1929, he published The Chamber of Life. 1930, The Ship That Turned Aside. In 1931, Elaine's Tomb. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all these stories. Just G. Peyton Wertenbaker. I'll just call him Peyton. Peyton, he was at his best and seemed to love the kind of story where you had a conceptual breakthrough, where a single person was affected by some kind of science and got to see something cosmic, got to see the end of the world, got to see the universe. The Man from the Atom, he actually increased his size until our entire universe looked like just a bunch of atoms, and from there he expanded into another universe. Very cool, very cosmic story. What an incredible idea, what an incredible story. That was amazing. It's a top tale. That's definitely a top tale. Well written. The sequel, not so much. The sequel, he introduced more than just the main character, and that's where Wertenbaker falls flat. He can't write women. He can't write character very well. If he's got a single first-person character in the narrative, he does just fine. If he's in a third-person situation with a number of characters, it leaves a lot to be desired. The characterization is really cardboard. which is unfortunate. After he published his 6 science fiction stories, that's all he did, 6 science fiction stories, then he left the genre forever. He did publish a couple of kind of what you would call regionalist type novels about middle or southern America in the 1930s, Grapes of Wrath kind of things, but not quite as good as Grapes of Wrath, I'm sure. I don't know, I haven't read them, but I think they would be as famous as Grapes of Wrath if they were as good. But that's not always the case. Sometimes books are overlooked and forgotten that deserve attention. But I can't find copies of his regionalist books. And later on, he wrote nonfiction. He wrote one called 5,000 Miles Towards Tokyo in 1945. In 1953, he wrote The Green and Red Planet, which kind of compared and contrasted Earth and Mars. And in 1968, he wrote 50 Years of Aerospace Medicine. Some kind of interesting nonfiction titles, I think. But his science fiction, like I say, with The Man from the Atom and The Coming of the Ice, where he focuses on one character that's experiencing something really extraordinary, the stories are amazing. They are really good. When he brings in characters, the characters are flat. The writing could be better. You can enjoy the stories. They're certainly enjoyable. Just understand that they're not the best, that there were other better writers at that time, even in the science fiction pulps. Like David H. Keller was very much contemporary of Wertenbaker. But Wertenbaker, the real distinction of Wertenbaker is that he wrote the very first new science fiction story to be published by Amazing Stories. Amazing Stories launched by publishing reprints of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Edgar Allan Poe even. And they also reprinted The Man from the Atom in the early Amazing Stories. But the sequel to The Man from the Atom was the very first brand new, never before published story in the very first science fiction magazine. So he has the distinction of really being the first one to start the progress of looking back at H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and trying to do that for the pulp magazines. Him and all the authors that followed him, Edmund Hamilton, Jack Williamson, David H. Keller, R.F. Starzl, Harl Vincent, those people that followed him in the late 1920s and 1930s, they laid the foundation for the science fiction magazines to follow into the future. And like I say, he did some really nice things in what little he wrote. And I really don't think I can say much more than just to say that from a reader's standpoint, a modern reader's standpoint, most people are not going to be very interested in his story. This is going to appeal to the people that love the early science fiction, that have already read like Jack Williamson or some of John W. Campbell's early works. The people that love Stanley G. Weinbaum, people that love R.F. Starzl. G. Peyton Wertenbaker is worth, like I say, it's 6 short stories. It's not going to take much of your time. You can find all of them in PDFs of the old magazines. A couple of them have been anthologized a number of times over the years. There isn't a single collection of Wertenbaker's because he only wrote 6. It's a 100-page collection isn't going to sell very well. So, you know, he's for the science fiction historian, the science fiction purist, the person who wants to dig deep and dig into the past and learn where it all came from. And then, well, like I say, after Vernon, Wells, and Burroughs, the first one is Wertenbaker. So with that, go and dig some Wertenbaker up and see what you think. Leave comments. Come back and watch more videos about stuff that you may be a little more interested in, like Philip K. Dick or Stephen King, or, you know, we've got a lot of horror coming up for October, and other authors coming up that I'm going to investigate and give you overviews of. So come back and watch more. Until then, have a good time reading whatever.